This week's episode of The Clear Out was recorded on the 24th of November 2021 at home in Wicklow. And in it, I discuss ideas of leadership, good and bad. And that's leadership in a context of social unrest and in a context of extreme behaviour and extreme acts of personal protest or personal crisis which result in the taking of lives. So the episode was partially inspired by or provoked by the events in the United States a few days ago, where a driver crashed into a Christmas parade in Milwaukee, in Waukesha in Milwaukee, and it just got me thinking about what the perpetrators of those acts, what they have gone through to get to that point where they feel that's the best available choice to them. And I think leadership has a large role to play in helping people in that situation or in compounding their circumstances or their world view. So that's the main kind of area of discussion. The idea of proportionality is in there as well, in terms of like the extremity of these acts, this version of acting out one's rage or hurt or one's sense of frustration. If that's the extreme acting out, I discuss how if we swing in the other way to where that pain originated, or the depth of that wound, or the depth of that hurt, or the depth of that sense of disempowerment or disenfranchisement, that's really in the mix as well. And so that's what's coming up. There is, as always, a movie reference that ties in with the overall theme, which I think you'll enjoy hearing about. I forgot to mention it in the episode, so I'll quickly do it here. If you want to show this podcast some love via a little bit of funding, you can do so at patreon.com/theclearout, or you can also use the supporter link, both of which you'll find in the description for this episode wherever you are listening. Feel free to shout out on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook. Spread the love, spread the word. If you're enjoying the podcast, feel free to recruit some listeners on my behalf. Thanks very much indeed. Okay, let's get on with it. I'll see you there. Cheers.
Oh, not gonna change my mind, leaving the dream behind.
Hi, my name is Dara Clear, and you're listening to The Clear Out. How are you today? How's it going? Take a beat there. Just take a pause. Check in with yourself. Check your pulse. And I don't mean your heartbeat. I'm talking about where your head's at, where your heart's at, emotionally, psychologically, what's going on. Bring that energy back in. Give yourself a moment of presence. So, let's do it. Let's go. Let's go on this journey. I don't know where I'm going, but you're coming with me. That's the worst. I used to hate that. When I was a kid. You know, just not having the choice, having to go with your parents, to a friend's house, or as often was the case in my youth, to the pub. And I am by no means unique in this regard as an Irish child growing up in the 70s and 80s. The pub was the hub. If your family was a drinking family, and mine was, and I used to, at a certain point, I used to just dread the sort of helplessness of having to go and not knowing when I'd be leaving, and just feeling that I'm stuck. There's no exit strategy, and it's primed. It's programmed in me still. I have a real gut aversion to not having an exit strategy, not having an exit plan, not knowing where the door out is. I don't like being stuck in a place, which is ironic, I think my wife would say, because she's like, you don't want to go anywhere. But yeah, that's it. When I find a place I like, I ain't for moving. But yeah, I mean, there's a range. There's a range in there. So yeah. Anyway, that I want you to hang on to that idea of there's no there's no way out. There isn't a doorway out. That's going to play in very centrally to the theme of today's episode, and I want to ask you to stick that in the memory bank when it comes to dropping in the movie reference that I have this week that ties in with the theme. Yeah, so there you go. That's something to just anticipate. A little bit of suspense. Where is he going? Where is he going with the door? The way out. Before I sat down to record here, or before I pressed record on my little #blessed recording studio, i.e. my laptop and a plug-in microphone, I was rifling through my wife's drawers, and that's not a euphemism. The little home office that my wife and I share, which I use for my recording purposes. I use it for the podcast, obviously, and I also use it to record the content that I produce for Aura, the meditation and sleep app that I create stuff for. Aura. Feel my aura. I'm going to cough. Hold on a second. Excuse me, sorry. I recorded a couple of nice stories last week. I did a nice version of The Legend of Finn McCool and the Salmon of Knowledge. I refamiliarized myself with it and jotted down the main story beats and then just recorded it. I put that up on Aura. It just went live in the last 24 hours. It's quite a nice one. I found out much more about that story. I didn't realize the whole kind of background and the doomed partnership of Finn McCool's parents. You know, classic old feuding families and tribes at war stuff. Loved it. Anyway, and I also put up another nice story about a little leaf on a tree that just doesn't want to let go when winter comes knocking. So you can probably pick out the mental health message from that one. We all have to let go. Okay, we can't fix things in aspic. We can't pour nectar all over ourselves like some fossilized ancient mosquito. We have to let go and move on to the next moment. But in any case, the home office, it's primarily set up for my wife's working from home needs, and all her musical equipment is in here, and she's in the process of setting up her own music therapy practice, which is very exciting. She received her bank card this week with her business for her business account for the music therapy business. So I'll keep you posted on that. There's no point in me telling you when it's not live and ready to rock, but hopefully that's going to happen in the next couple of months. So anyway, it's her desk that she bought for the home office, and there's 3 lovely, tidy little, perfectly sliding drawers in that desk. And I went looking through them. What was I looking for? I know that's the question. I was looking for moisturiser. That's right, kids, moisturiser. Why was I looking for moisturiser? Because I like to take care of my hands. It's important that they feel soft and smooth. That's not really the reason. The reason is I just had a delivery of oil. We ran out of oil, and I went to put on the heat last night, primarily for the hot water. We can light the stove and it's lovely and toasty, but I put on the heating, and sent my daughter down to have her shower an hour later. So she's running around the house in the nude, and I stepped out into the into the kind of the TV room where there isn't a stove lit, and I was like, my God, it's freezing, and realised that, yeah, we were out of oil on, I think, what was probably the coldest night of the year so far. Well, certainly the coldest night of this season. And yeah, there was no hot water to be had. So, had oil delivered this morning, and because I'd had the heating on, I had to bleed the boiler. Man's stuff. So thank God for YouTube, because I learned how to do this the last time we ran out of oil. And I found a nice little YouTube video that told me exactly what I needed to do, because I'm going to confess I'm not that handy in that department. Anything to do with mechanics, engines, devices, I just kind of step slowly away from those situations. More rudimentary man stuff like chopping logs and digging holes and knocking down walls, real basic caveman stuff, I'm good to go. I'll swing an axe for you all day long, no problem. But don't ask me to work out which part goes where and what that does and what happens when that thing, interacts with that thing. Not so good in that area. So anyway, in the bleeding of the boiler, I got a lovely spray of kerosene all over my hands. And I had to repeat the process a couple of times before the boiler started functioning again. And I went to wash my hands and I realised that this lovely sort of red, it's gone now, but it was like a red kerosene burn just kind of at the base of my thumb and index finger. And it's like, okay. So I washed the old hands, and the hands were still reeking of kerosene. So you just know that that's what toxic stuff does. It just gets in no matter what you do. And then you've got that kind of burny feeling on your hands. So that's why I was looking for the moisturiser. But there was none there. So I'll be having words with my wife later. Why don't you keep some nice moisturiser in your drawers for me, for my hands? Okay? I'll report back on that. I probably won't. I'll probably forget. That's a more likely outcome. Anyway, what I want to talk about, speak to. I hear that a lot. Well, to speak to Michael's point, to speak further to what David said. It's amazing how these little phrases just suddenly kind of come into the the everyday parlance, particularly in public domains. Speak to, anyway, whatever. What I'd like to speak about today, and I did touch on this area in episode 21, so about 6 or 7 episodes ago, in mid-October, when I was speaking about shadows and light, and I did talk a little bit about proportional responses in that episode of the podcast. And I think the general thrust that day for me was to try and avoid catastrophizing and wigging out and having a disproportionate response to a crisis, and to try and keep things in perspective. So like, as a general sort of mental health strategy or tool, it's to try and keep a sense of perspective and try and keep a sense of consequences, and to not, as I say, to not sort of catastrophize and to not then go on that either upward spiral towards anxiety or the downward spiral towards depression, and to let it escalate in unhealthy and unhelpful ways. So that was, as I say, that was like episode 21, which I think was called Walking in the Shadow and Keeping Her Light. Keep her light, lads. Keep her light. Take her handy. Keep her light. But today I was just thinking, and this stream of thought was provoked, prompted, triggered by this incident in the States just a few days ago, when that driver drove into a Christmas parade in is it Waukesha in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Yeah, Waukesha. A Christmas parade was happening. A driver drove in, and there have been several deaths and many injured. And it just, my initial response was sort of, not again. These crashes, these truck attacks, car attacks, SUV attacks, just to add to the other, the various other kind of public, atrocities, terrorist attacks, outbreaks, lash outs, whatever you want to call them, that typically involve somebody, people dying, typically involve the perpetrator, being shot by security forces, police, or being taken to, being handed down a prison sentence, whatever. I mean, there's been quite a few of these in recent years. I'm trying to think. I know there were, and it's not just in the USA, incidentally. I'm going to speak to that in a second. But of course, there was a Christmas market. Was it a Christmas market in Berlin in 2016? Was crashed into as well. There was the truck attack in Nice on Bastille Day in the same year, 2016. And of course, there was the Charlottesville car attack in the States. It's the specific nature of the attack it's kind of secondary in a way. I mean, the car driving into crowds. I mean, it happened in Dublin a few years ago, I think. Somebody drove their car down one of the very busy pedestrianised streets in Dublin, in Henry Street, if I recall correctly. I was still living in Melbourne at the time, but I do have a memory of that. So, it's not specific to any one location, any one country, any one culture. And it does seem that it is more and more common in these times. And if these times are times that you could describe as fractious, times that we could describe as being sort of anxiety ridden, times of uncertainty, times of extreme stress, social and political stress, social and political disharmony, unrest. We put on top of that the pressure of the pandemic, the various restrictions that we've been living under, the unknowability of outcomes that we've been living with in terms of the coronavirus and its variants, how that's impacted us socially, how it's impacted us interpersonally, how it's impacted us in terms of work, career, home life, public life. I mean, every which way, what it's done to sort of economies. Being in Ireland, you throw into the mix the sort of, you can throw Brexit in there as well, and the kind of emergence of some very peculiar, in my opinion, wrong-headed populism in the UK, certainly amongst the sort of Tories and Conservatives in England. These are unhappy times. They're not. This is not a breezy, cruisy time to be alive, and there are so many agitative and provocative, and I feel disingenuous agents and actors out there constantly stirring things up and dividing people, and what's the word I'm looking for? Not fanaticizing, but the one I mean. I've just gone blank. Some instant brain fog descending. Extremify, fanaticize. What is that word? it'll come back to me. But you know what I mean? When someone gets so fired up and so provoked to an extreme viewpoint that it becomes not just a sit-at-home emotional or psychological state, but it becomes, I'm leaving my house now to do something extreme state. I'm leaving my house now with a gun. I'm leaving my house now to get in my car to commit an extreme act. Radicalize. That's the word I was looking for. Bloody hell. Radicalize. It's not, and I guess it's not all. I mean, and this is the thing. This is what I was going to say. You know, we say radicalize, and I believe, you know, we hear that word radicalize, and it falls into a certain context. And you think of groups like, you know, the Islamic State, ISIS, and radicalizing disenfranchised Muslims, disenfranchised, often young Muslim men in various parts of the world who go, right, this is going to be my response to this. And it becomes, you know, radicalized becomes a sort of a politicized word. And in a way, it allows us to put it in a certain place that feels less close to us. Oh, well, you know, of course, you know, that community, they'd be vulnerable to being radicalized and vulnerable to those messages. And there's a legacy, and it's connected to a certain fundamentalist viewpoint and a desire to destroy one's enemies and to proselytize and blah blah blah. And we can go, oh well, that wouldn't happen to me. That's a very particular scenario. And similarly, referring back to the Christmas parade tragedy in Waukesha that began this train of thought, I often find, and I have found over the years, and particularly living in Ireland and for a while living in England back in the day, and my 10 years in Australia, I think a lot of us who don't live in the USA, who don't live in the States, we can have that kind of knee-jerk reaction of, crazy America, the crazy US of A, the hyper jingoism, the hyper gun culture, the bigger is better culture, the front leaders, the front runners always of, capitalism and consumerist culture, and the sort of epitome of excess of, desires and appetites, and all that perception of America as that place can feed into this reductive prism through which we view incidents like this, the various shootings, the incident like the one that just happened in Waukesha a few days ago, the Charlottesville attack, the Black Lives Matter protests and rioting, the militia that sprung up in response to those protests. And we can, at a safe remove, where gun culture, as the most obvious example, isn't something that is entrenched in a sort of a constitutionally secure viewpoint and way of life in countries like Australia, Ireland, the UK, and others. And so we can kind of go, oh, it's crazy. And again, we just keep that kind of safe distance. And I've spoken before. I sort of had an episode that I tried to explore this idea of, how we view crazy, how we view mad, and the sort of how those terms are so lacking in nuance and so lacking in sophistication, and they're sort of a get out of jail card that allows us to not participate in really trying to understand. And so when we, and I was speaking in the context of interpersonal relationships and having people in your life who you go, he's mad, she's mad, I can't be dealing with them. And again, it's the sort of, it's a way of just detaching and distancing. But I think it's relevant when we do that to a culture. And I mean, along that same line, I mean, I certainly, used to get sort of teased. Let's use that word, teased. It feels like such a juvenile word. But I used to get a bit of slagging, a bit of teasing, joking in Australia from Australians who'd, make friendly sort of jokes about, the Irish, they're a bit backward, or they're sort of, the fundamental joke was one that related to the Irish being perceived as crazy / stupid / unique in their thinking in a way that doesn't make sense to anybody else. But what you hear as an Irish person is, all right, you're saying I'm stupid. You're saying that my culture is stupid. Now, it's meant in a friendly, joking way, because many Australians, I found, they've great affection for Ireland and the Irish, and of course, many Australians have Irish in their background, in their kind of genealogy. You don't have to go back that far. Certainly, and when I speak of Australia in this way, I'm talking about white Australia. I'm talking about, the Australia that was colonised by the British and the penal colonies and the establishment of Australia as a white European colony. I'm not talking about indigenous Australia that goes back, thousands and thousands of years earlier than that. I don't talk about that because I have no exposure to it and no knowledge base from which to speak. But that thing of having the prism of that reductive cultural stereotype put on you, which I've experienced over the years, both in England and in Australia. I bristle. You're like, no shit. I bristle. I never cared for it, and I'd have to step very carefully, lest I, take someone's head off with my reactive kind of, how dare you? Have a look in the mirror, pal. But anyway, I'm just trying to say, I get it. I'm trying to say it's the reductive thing is not helpful. And looking at these incidents, whether we kind of go Berlin, Nice, they were, fundamentalist Islamic attacks, or if we look at Waukesha and someone, driving into that Christmas parade, the Charlottesville car attack, that guy was, a kind of a politicized white supremacist. And then if you think of also, again, the incident from last year in Kenosha, where that young American guy, Kyle Rittenhouse, I think he was 17 at the time, and there were these riots happening there were riots in response to another African-American, another black man had been shot by white police. And that story just kept on running. And it was probably also, these riots were on the back of the George Floyd killing. I Can't Breathe, all of that. But this situation last year in Kenosha, this young guy decided, okay, there's all this stuff happening outside. There's a lot of anger out there in the streets. There's a lot of social unrest. There's a lot of people out there with guns. People are really fired up. There's a lot of hate and pain and hurt in the air. So as a 17-year-old, my choice is to strap on a military-grade semi-automatic weapon and to walk out into the middle of it. And the outcome was he shot 3 people and killed 2 of them. And he just got acquitted from the charges that resulted from that last week. He was found not guilty of manslaughter and the various other charges that were made against him. And his defence was that he was acting in self-defence. The people he killed were white, incidentally, if that feels relevant. I suppose it is relevant in the context of what was happening. I was thinking it would be hard. It would be hard to imagine if that had been a black guy walking down the street with that weapon. If I find it hard to imagine that he wouldn't have either been shot and killed, or if he had committed the same crime and killed 2 other people and shot another, that he would not have been acquitted of the charges brought against him. I don't know if I'm accurate in thinking that way, but that's my gut sort of feels like that's what would have happened. I mean, again, that's another discussion, and again, not one about which I'm equipped to talk with any authority. It just feels really messed up and wrong, and I mean, there's dead people there, and that guy is walking free, and he made some terrible decisions to, I mean, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, look, it's not really, I don't want to get bogged down in the specifics of that case. What I am interested in, though, is if we can agree that each of these incidents that I've name checked, if we can agree that these are all extreme actions, these are incidents of extreme behavior, extreme decision making, with dire consequences, with deaths of, I'm not going to use the word innocent. I mean, I don't know how, that has no kind of relevance one way or another, I think, in this discussion, but it results in the death of other people who hadn't made the same decisions to act in an extreme way in every case, in most cases. But I think if you think of these extreme actions and think that they are a response to something very serious in that individual, and so if we think of it like this, if you can picture those office desk toys, the one that has the swinging balls, I don't know what the hell it's called, but you know, the one where they click clack, it's just a little frame and you've got the balls hanging on the frame, and you pull one ball back and it clacks into the other, and then 3 balls over, the other ball swings out the other way, exactly the same distance. So it's like equal and opposite reaction. I could have looked that one up to find out what that's called, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. So I was thinking about this and thinking, this person who drove into the Christmas parade a few days ago, that what my thinking was, what is the depth of that person's pain? What is the depth of that person's anger? What's the depth of their hurt, their wound, their sense of, I don't know, their sense of personal injustice, their sense of rejection, their sense of frustration. And I think you have to go to the extreme end of that pain or that wound or that sense of personal crisis to try and make sense of the extreme action at the other end of the spectrum. So basically, what if we look at extreme acting out, and then we have to swing hard to the opposite axis to identify the extent of the wound, the pain, the anger, the hurt. And this is a bid to understand the circumstances that give birth to this kind of behavior, this type of act that has tragic human consequences. It's not necessarily a bid to invite huge empathy for the person or the people who commit these crimes that end up killing people. I mean, again, for me, that's another area to go into the deeply, deeply, deeply specific personal experience I know, for example, like the Charlottesville car attack, that guy, again, another young guy, was in his mid-20s, I think. His father died, I think, around the time he was born or just before he was born, and he just grew up, it seemed, as a very angry young man and was violent towards his mother. And, you know, the specific situations can paint a picture that helps us understand a level of vulnerability, a level of suggestibility, being susceptible to certain messaging, just feeling wronged by life and then choosing to act out. And so much then is about what you're being exposed to, and so much then is also about what services have been made available to help that person who has been vulnerable from a very young age, well, in that case particularly. So you can kind of hear, like, I'd be more interested in leaning to what are the kind of cultural and, you know, what are the cultural and social conditions, you know, what social and cultural conditions prevail to make an extreme action seem like the only choice. And then it becomes a sort of a broader discussion of, you know, of governance, of history, of culture, of political attitudes, of social systems and like social kind of philosophies, and you can see, I feel you can put it into that context and go, you know, often the people who commit these crimes, there's a lot of stuff in the background that goes, maybe this person was savable at some point. Maybe this person could have been set on a different path at some point. And that not being saved, that not being put on a certain path, combined with then other cultural, social elements and the availability of weapons in this case, or, you know, in some of these cases, and the kind of, I suppose, I don't know, you can add into the conversation when, you know, if you're a person who is witnessing and consuming other incidents of this type, other extreme acts, other acts of terror, other extreme actings out of personal rage or personal pain, then it becomes kind of normalized. It becomes normalized. I mean, not every person who acts out in this way to take the lives of people who are really uninvolved in your crisis, to take out random, to decide to take out, by which I mean to kill, to injure, to maim, to take out people who are not involved directly with your personal crisis, that is such an extreme position. And you think, even though, and so like, not everyone is massively politicized. Sometimes it's just deeply personal. You know, a deeply personal conflict added to mental unwellness, added to mental health disorder, added to other sort of social and cultural conditions that disenfranchise or deprive one of the structures and the support and the guidance and the safety net that would otherwise help that person get well. So, I mean, this wouldn't be comparable to, say, the guy who committed the murders at the mosque in New Zealand a couple of years ago, where he had an entire manifesto laid out, which was his own sort of personal kind of political vision, and sort of a manifesto that advocated no mixing of the species, so to speak. So not exactly, I don't know if I read some of it. You could find it online, And I read quite a bit of it to kind of go, where was this guy coming from? What was his mission? What was his thinking? I don't think I came away from it thinking he was like a white supremacist, but it was more like everyone should look after their own, and mixing races, and again, or not again, but I mean, I know more and more recently we're understanding race very, very differently. So understanding race not in terms of fundamental biological, chemical, physical differences, but understanding race as something completely artificial and socially constructed to control people. But in the context of that guy's manifesto, it was more, each nation should look after its own, and will not, that was the way to survive, to keep your own line alive and well and thriving. And his reaction then was to focus on on Muslims in his case, and send his message in the most brutal, horrifying way. But again, I kind of come back to, what is it? Like, what is it that leads people to take such drastic action in the first place? And I've already used the phrase acting out, and typically that phrase acting out is used in the context of parenting, in terms of, oh yeah, my daughter, she's acting out. And I've dropped in a few incidents, in this podcast, of when my daughter acts out and pushes my buttons, and then I kind of go, oh, okay, this is what it's about. But I suppose my argument is, we put this phrase acting out into this much more serious, drastic, horrifying context of these public atrocities. And that is an unhappy person in the society in which they find themselves, acting out in the most extreme way. And so, in that case, we can look at this person, this extremist, or this extremely damaged person, extremely angry, extremely hurt, extremely weaponized. And the weapon could be the car, it could be the truck, the SUV, it could be a literal weapon, a gun, whatever. But they have been pushed, or they have perceived their society or their own situation in such a particular way that they decide to act out in the ways that I've listed at the top of the episode. And if we stick with the parenting analogy, you can direct your anger or your sense of revulsion or horror at the individual or at the individuals involved. Or you can look and go, well, society. If society is the parent, or if the government is the parent, or if the culture is the parent, then that society, that government, that culture hasn't created the conditions to help that child. So in this case, the people perpetrating these crimes, I'm viewing them as a damaged child of society. And again, it's not about trying to apportion blame. It's not going, oh well, if the state of Wisconsin had done this, that, or the other, or if the US government had made these decisions, or whatever. But it's trying to look at the kind of the broader picture and go, where can change be made? Like, where can change be sought? And I think this is where leadership comes in. And who'd be a leader? because I only had to take a half a beat there to go, wow, what leader steps up and goes, I'm going to try and lead us out of this mess, lead us out of these dynamics where every other week someone's taking a gun out on the street or getting into their car or being radicalized, and it results in the loss of many lives, children, older people, whatever, lives that didn't have to be lost. That is a big ask, and to flip that, what happens when a leader is the radicalized one? What happens when the leader is that damaged person? I was kind of trying to jot down a couple of notes for this, and I was kind of going, well, Hitler took that extreme viewpoint, and he basically popularized the hatred, popularized and legitimized the hatred of Jews in his rise to political power. And his mission, like his whole kind of philosophy of, it's because of the Jews that this is my situation. So his position was then to vilify and to demonize, the Jewish power holders as he saw them, and to go, this is what needs to be rooted out of our society. These are the people who need to be destroyed and eradicated, and that is that's the extreme example. And of course, it's almost become a taboo, like to compare someone to Hitler is one of the most extreme things you can say, and people almost as I say, it's almost not said, because no one could ever be as bad as Hitler's the sort of the blueprint, the watermark, he's the standard by which we measure all other sort of dictators and populist lunatics and icons of hatred and division and racism. But I think it works. I think the analogy works, that, if we go, well, Hitler, he was just acting out. He was just acting out his damage, his rage, his pathology. And if we go down that road, I'm going to draw a line back to Trump. And I think Trump is a great example of someone who is damaged and was clearly damaged by his upbringing and had a very, what am I going to say? He didn't have a great dad. Is that one way to put it? In the most innocuous terms. I think Trump was getting damaged from day one, by being born into that family, and his pathology was shaped. And then he grew up to be this sort of, narcissistic, figure, verging on, sociopathic is maybe too much, but someone with a evident disregard for others, and his sort of, I think it's well documented, a sort of a historic, I feel anyway, it's my perception, I don't know if I'm correct about this, but I think his sort of historic sort of racist inclinations, and certainly you think of the young guys in Central Park who were wrongly accused and sentenced for the beating and raping of a white New York jogger, and went to jail. That story was brilliantly dealt with in that drama last year. Oh, again, I've gone blank on the name. I'll look it up and come back to you on it. But I know around that time, this was in the 80s, and Trump took out that full page ad and was like, yeah, let's bring back the death sentence for these guys. Like, Trump has a nose. He has a nose for the fault line. He has a nose for, the provocative, enraging position. And for me, he always comes down on the wrong side of it. But like, that's his way of getting attention, which he thrives on. Like, there'd be nothing worse for Trump than to be ignored. But to go back to what I was saying a few moments ago about Hitler and the rooting out of the Jews and comparing Jews to vermin. I mean, this was a sort of an ideology that was scarily made real in Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Bastards, where the Nazi officer played by Christoph Waltz was known as the rat hunter because he had a nose for the rats, and the rats being the Jewish people trying to hide from Nazi persecution. And there's that extraordinary opening scene in Inglourious Bastards. Is not a movie I care for very much. I think there's a lot of not great acting in it. There's some brilliant sequences and set pieces. That opening scene is one of the best things Tarantino has ever done, in my opinion, where the Germans arrive at this idyllic French farm, and the farmer is hiding Jewish people under the floorboards of his house, and he tries to kind of negotiate with the officer, or tries to deceive him, but unsuccessfully, and ultimately has to give away that yes, there are Jewish people hiding under my floorboards, and it's a grim, chilling scene. But the Christopher Waltz character is referring to them as rats, and he's known as the rat hunter. I think I've remembered that correctly. And I'm mentioning this now because Trump just a couple of years ago, he was throwing dirt at a US congressman, and he was referring to Baltimore. And he was basically saying, Baltimore, what a dump. No one would want to live there. It's a rat and kind of vermin infested, toilet is fundamentally what he was saying. And there was a CNN news anchor, a black guy by the name of Victor Blackwell. And I think that was only a couple of years ago. That was like July 2019, and Trump had been referring to the rats and rodents in Baltimore, and it was just this horrible kind of dig at Baltimore. So famously, famously or infamously, but I think accurately and respectfully represented and portrayed in The Wire, and you got a good look at what. Certainly, David Simon's choice to focus on different communities in Baltimore and the political shenanigans, and what the police were dealing with, and what social workers were dealing with, and what educators were dealing with, and it was pretty grim, but there were always kind of shoots of life and decency and integrity and positivity and hope within that, because that's real. That's the real situation. Like any area where there's deprivation, any area that's been shut out, ignored, shat upon socially, politically, economically, there are always great people in those communities doing their best, trying to do the right thing, trying to lift themselves, lift the people around them, trying to hold on to the dignity that's there to be had in that community. And in any case, this newsman on CNN, Victor Blackwell, he was responding to Trump's comments, and he just went into, you should look it up, because it's stuff that I find that I respond to very strongly, because someone is standing up and going, this is what I care about, this is what I believe, this is what's important to me, and they're not hiding. And he got emotional and he teared up, and he was like, I'm from there. I was there from childhood to high school, to graduation, and there's good people who get up every day and they go to work and they do the right thing and they're good Americans. And it was just like a pushback on Trump's, another example of Trump's reckless, careless, thoughtless rhetoric. Maybe I'm giving Trump too much credit by saying it. It's thoughtless. Maybe it was very calculated. He just knew how to kind of push these buttons. But like, he did nothing. He did nothing for social and racial harmony in America in the time of his presidency. And I think it's terrifying that he might come back and get re-elected. I mean, I hope that doesn't happen. And just to add to that little piece of narrative, there was another black newsman, also on CNN, and last year, so whatever, about 18 months after the Victor Blackwell incident, a man called Van Jones was live on air, and he was asked by his colleague, Joe Biden had just got elected, and his colleague was like, okay, so Van, what are your thoughts on this? Biden's in, Trump's out. And yet again, you had this very articulate, passionate, emotional, black American man who just spoke from the heart and broke down crying. Broke down is probably an overstatement, but was crying, wiping tears from his eyes as he just, made a very articulate response to his own sense of relief that Trump would be out, and that someone who was far more decent in his eyes was coming in, and how that was going to be a great sort of respite and relief, and an unburdening for so many people in America over the previous few years of the Trump presidency. And he's talking about Muslims and people of color and immigrants and all the people that Trump had so sort of gleefully vilified and demonized and made easy targets, or made easier. He made them easier targets for people who were motivated by hate. He made them easier targets for people who wanted to express their hate, who wanted to show their own, I guess, I don't know, if that type of hate is an expression of insecurity, if it's an expression of fear, if it's an expression of frustration. Trump was wired. He was wired for that. He was so tuned into, that was his frequency. That was, and that, I feel that led to the Capitol riots, which again saw the loss of life, which again saw people being fired up to act in extreme ways. And I said earlier, this is about leadership on so many levels. I mean, you can look at the whole structural systems and go, oh, well, healthcare could be better, education could be better, the means of social integration could be better, public policy could be better, and that's the nightmare of politics. That's the enormous challenge, the sort of almost unwinnable challenge of politics, to go in and go, well, I want to make a change, and do you know how hard this is to make things happen? Do you know the dance that you have to do? But then my argument is, well, okay, I mean, I would never want to go into that world. I'm not cut out for it. But I admire people who genuinely go in and go, yeah, I think I can affect change. I think I can do some good here. But you do need, on top of that, you need leaders who are out there publicly, visibly, unapologetically trying to lead people to a better place. And Trump is an example of horrendous leadership, in my opinion. I think hugely divisive, hugely irresponsible. I believe there was more blood on American streets because of him being president. And so, where can we find that type of leadership? Where does it start? Now, I don't know. Like I have felt in recent years, so let's say the last 10 to 15 years, there has been a real lack of confident, outspoken sort of moral leadership from a lot of politicians who would maybe be a little bit more on, in the centre, or lean a little bit more to the left, lean a little bit more towards kind of socialist positions or socialist democratic positions, people who want to improve, public funding, healthcare, education, the obvious ones, and people who have been very slow to condemn what I think have been the much noisier voices on the kind of other side of the political spectrum. And I think that has those politicians or those leaders or those public figures being quiet has facilitated the rise of populism. It's facilitated the success and rise of populist leaders. And maybe, and I think this was true in America, I think there was a sort of a political complacency, certainly amongst the Democrats and Hillary Clinton's campaign. They didn't take the Trump threat seriously. And I was like, are you kidding me? They were sort of mocking him and ridiculing him. And it just doesn't work. I mean, we've just got to take, and I'm just going to take that as if that's the model, it exposes the flaws of not looking at people with much more nuance and not taking people's unhappiness seriously, and not taking people's disenfranchisement more seriously. And I think Trump is a great example of someone who felt disenfranchised from the political game, and he felt he wasn't being taken seriously. But that was rocket fuel for him. It was rocket fuel for his sense of injustice, and it was rocket fuel for his kind of narcissistic fixation on settling scores and getting even. And I think he really wanted to be the one who displaced Obama, insofar as, okay, Obama was at the end of his term, but he just came to represent, the opposite of sort of the most attractive aspect of Obama's kind of persona and what he represented as an incredibly, articulate, erudite, considered leader, who was trying to do what he could for the larger American public. And Trump came in and he was kind of the antithesis of that. So I don't know. I mean, I don't really know where I'm going with this in terms of, what's the pathway for better leadership. I mean, of course, because I've done a lot of teaching over the years, I kind of think, it does start in classrooms. But it starts at home. It starts with the conversations any of us can have with anybody else, where, perhaps we invite those conversations into our lives, where we're looking at things with a bit more thoughtfulness and a bit more generosity and openness to those people who challenge us, to those opinions that challenge us. I think the sort of extremely binary nature of what public discourse has become, the sort of zero-sum game of you're terrible, you're the bad ones, we're the good ones. And again, if we stay in America and kind of go the red state, blue state divide, the Make America Great Again position, and then whatever the opposite of that is, a sort of a multicultural, multi kind of tolerant liberal sort of bank. It doesn't work. The idea of one cancelling out the other doesn't work, and the cancelling of anybody doesn't work. It doesn't take us anywhere. It's a type of denial, like the shutout. It's like, cool, we've dealt with that. It doesn't exist anymore. I mean, we have to look at systems. We have to look at, layered approaches. You have to look at step-by-step improvements. I I was looking at an Instagram post earlier this morning, and there's a woman in Louth, which is that's a county in Ireland, a region in Ireland if you're not an Irish listener, just north of Dublin. And there's a woman there. Her name is, I need to just refresh my memory. I think it's, if I've got it right, it's Laura Bardon, Bardon. And she has a company called sisterhoodjournals.com. Yeah, sisterhoodjournals.com. And her business is, she's producing mental health journals. And okay, aesthetically, they're not really my bag, but you know, it's the sisterhood, it's not the brotherhood. So that's fine. But she put up a personal post from about a week ago. Yeah, Laura Bardon, that's right, LauraBardon. So Laura, she's in Louth, and sisterhoodjournals.com. You can go and look at her products there. These, what I think it's actually a great product. They're mental health journals, and so you can kind of jot down your thoughts. There's exercises to do, there's prompts, there's quotes, and she put up a personal post from about a week ago that I saw this morning, and she was just talking about her own recent mental health journey, and she was saying at the time of writing she'd just had her first CBT session, a cognitive behavioural therapy session, and she found it useful, but not fully. It was just a start, I suppose, is what she was saying. But she'd had to wait 7 months to get that appointment, going through the public health system here in Ireland. And her first point of contact 7 months ago, she'd been seen by a psychiatrist who gave her a tablet and kind of sent her on her way. And she had presented having not eaten, having not washed. She was in an extremely vulnerable state, and that was all she got, and it was completely inadequate. And the point she was making in her post was that she probably wouldn't have survived in the interim if she hadn't had the kind of tremendous support of her family and a kind of a close-knit network that helped her emerge from that situation intact. But like a 7-month lag from I need help to, well, okay, we'll take this tablet and okay, we'll see what we can do for you. And 7 months later, she gets an appointment. She was making the point that a lot of people wouldn't be here after 7 months. And, she's, commenting on her own good fortune to have a good support network. But I was reading it and going, well, there's an example of a system that's failing, a system that isn't set up to look after people. And that is when we need better leadership. That is when we need to set aside political point scoring and short-term vision and go, like, what do we want? What do we want for this country? What do we want for the vulnerable people in our society? Are we willing to invest in a long-term vision? And and that's something that can be applied to the property sector in Ireland as well, and our whole relationship with land, with property, with home ownership. Again, there was something I saw a week or two ago. Peter DePauw, a guy who put up a great post just saying the whole history of property ownership is contaminated in Ireland by our history with colonialism and not being allowed to own and being dispossessed, and then just doing anything you can to kind of look after your own and find your own little patch. But the whole situation has a toxic history which we haven't shaken off. So it's a broken relationship, and again, we're lacking that leadership to really set out a long-term plan that goes, this can be cracked, this can be solved. Now again, I'm not the guy. I'm going to solve it by talking about it on my podcast. I'm not going to solve it by talking on the podcast, but this is where real leadership matters. and real long-term vision. The short-term fixes don't cut it. They don't work. We need to do better. We need to do better in healthcare. We need to do better in mental healthcare. We need to do better in property. We need to do better in education. And it has to come from leadership. There has to be, it can't just be tokenism. It can't just be a sort of a cottage industry of individuals trying to do their own thing. But I applaud it, and I applaud someone like Laura Barden, who's going, well, I'm doing my bit, and she's helping herself and she's helping others by bringing out a product that is designed to put a tool in your hands to help you take care of yourself. It's not the only solution, as she says in her, her literature, on her posts. If you need help, seek the help of professionals. Find a doctor, find a therapist, find a counsellor. Help is out there, and ask for it. And I couldn't agree with her more. So well done, her. And I'll throw a link in the description of this episode. So look, I'm kind of coming to the end of my time here today on this particular topic. And I want to drop in a movie that I just watched last night that I think connects really well to this. We're talking about extreme responses to trauma, extreme responses to personal pain. And I watched a brilliant movie last night called The Invitation, which is a 2015 movie directed by Karen Kusama. And it's a very simple setup. It's a dinner party. That's it. It's a dinner party. And we are, as is often the case with movies, we're invited to kind of identify or see this party through the eyes of the first character, or first characters we meet. And it's a man and his partner, and they're going to the house of his ex-wife. And he is clearly a bit of a nervous character. He's got a kind of a subdued, nervous kind of way about him. And it's clear from the start of the movie that it's not a dinner party he's like relishing going to. And it's been a couple of years, but he and his ex-wife had a certain experience, and it's kind of an opportunity to bring the kind of group of friends back together and have a moment to move on and acknowledge something. And it's just a really well told tale, a really well set up story that you're kind of going, I smell a rat, something is not right here, something's really off. And from early on, you're just getting that kind of that ominous feeling in your gut, and very well chosen moments on the soundtrack just to kind of put us to not allow us to relax and enjoy what's going on. And very well acted. The not a lot of, some faces I knew, only a couple of actors I was able to name. John Carroll Lynch emerges at some point, and he's immediately, you're going, there's something really off here. You might know that actor from David Fincher's Zodiac, where he was the suspected Zodiac killer, and played it very, very well. And he was also in that movie that Michael Keaton was in a couple of years ago, The Founder, which told the story of McDonald's, the fast food franchise. And John Carroll Lynch in that movie played a really likeable, sympathetic character. He doesn't get to play a lot of those. It's often the opposite. The only other actor I could name from The Invitation was Toby Huss, who is playing a sort of a charismatic other character who's not in attendance at the dinner party. But the movie there, it is really about how people deal with their pain. And it's also a bit of a satire, of a very dark satire. That's not a film for kids, by the way. It's pretty rough. But it's also a bit of a satire, I felt, of a certain LA kind of gullibility or vulnerability or susceptibility to certain ways of thinking or behaving. Check it out. It's not for the faint-hearted, but it's a really tight, kind of tense watch. That actor Toby Huss I just mentioned, he was in, if you're looking for another recommendation, he was in a great series from a few years ago called Halt and Catch Fire, which was a depiction of sort of the emergence of the sort of the computer age in the 80s, the emergence of the home computer age, and the kind of the race to get the best kind of computer system out there. So they create a sort of a fictional computer company, and Toby Huss was in it, Lee Pace as a sort of a charismatic Steve Jobs visionary type, Scoot McNairy, and then a couple of brilliant female characters. So for any female listeners to the pod, if you want to see some really great, strong female characters, there was a role for Mackenzie Davis and one for Kerry Bichet as different sort of computer heads, sort of kind of brilliant programmers or software people. I mean, again, I'm running out of the vocabulary, and this show was an introduction to me, or a sort of an explainer for, okay, I think I understand hardware and software better now. I did recommend it to a friend of mine who's worked in that sector for years, and he was a little bit less enthusiastic about it, but for numpties like me, I was like, I get it, I finally understand. So Halt and Catch Fire. There were 4 seasons, a lot of good stuff in it, and I don't think it really matters if you're not that interested in computers. Like, there's a lot of good personal drama in that as well, and as I said, a couple of great female parts, and then a late appearance in the series by Anna Klumsky, who you may or may not know that name. She was in that kids movie My Girl from years ago with, when Macaulay Culkin was, murdering us all with his unstoppable cuteness. It's a little sort of coming of age story, and she plays the the My Girl of the title. And anyway, she turns up as an adult in Halt and Catch Fire, and I was like, oh yeah, that's her. Anyway, there you go. Okay, so look, I don't know if I hit all my points, but I think there was some stuff there you could get your head around. Proportional responses, society and how it fails people, and the need for leadership, the need for better pathways to social wellness, I suppose. Anyway, I'll work it out. I'll reverse engineer this episode, to borrow a phrase from Halt and Catch Fire, and then I'll work out how to describe it in the preamble. Okay, as always, thank you so much for listening. Stay well, stay safe, stay positive if you can. Mind yourselves. Take care. All the best. Good luck. Bye.